come in. I've heard that just recently that herding Baptists is about as hard as herding cats. Hope people come in. My name is Tim Miller. I'm a professor of religious studies at the University of Kansas. I have a long-standing interest in new religious movements, alternative religions in the United States. And I'm here just to introduce Gary Noesner this afternoon. As you see from your program, you can read his bio there, and you see that he's the former chief hostage negotiator for the FBI. A lot of people think that the Branch Davidian standoff in Waco involved a hostage situation, which I hope by now everyone realizes wasn't true. People weren't hostages. They were free to come and go, and many did leave on their own. But that detail notwithstanding, we'll have some discussion and I think some critique of the FBI's actions at the Branch Davidian event. Gary Noesner's book, Stalling for Time, is out there, available for sale. So you might want to check it out further. And I won't stall for any more time. Here's Gary.
Thanks, Tim. It's a pleasure to be here, and I want to thank Dr. Melton for inviting me here, and Baylor University, as was mentioned by an earlier speaker. The FBI did use religious scholar resources at Baylor during this tragic event, and they were of great assistance to us. I'm probably the only law enforcement speaker or attendee here today, so for those of you ready to throw something at me, give me a little warning first and I'll duck. But I want to give you a perspective of the Waco incident that I don't think you've heard so far, and you may never have heard prior. I write about it extensively in my book, so it's in more detail there for those who are interested. I want to start off by, the name of my talk is The Challenges of Negotiating in Waco. And I will just tell you briefly, there were two primary challenges. One was with a fellow named David Koresh. The other was dealing with FBI on-scene management. I would say the latter was the harder of the two negotiations. People think of the FBI as a very efficient, very professional organization, and we are. I'm very proud to have spent my life being an FBI agent. I wanted to be an FBI agent since I was a little kid. FBI agents are doers of good deeds. I've had the pleasure of helping put corrupt politicians in jail, arrest organized crime figures that prey on society, most importantly, returning kidnapped victims safely home to their families, and resolving innumerable hostage barricade situations. So we have a lot of experience in doing this, and we are normally very successful. We're not jackbooted thugs who are trying to deprive Americans of their rights and liberties or deny them their religious freedom. That being said, it does not mean that the FBI is not fallible and is not composed of human beings who make mistakes. Sometimes we want to believe that there's a more sinister reason behind situations that don't come out the way we want. Oftentimes, it's not as complex as that. Let me tell you a little bit about FBI culture. In the FBI, we are taught that we have now become special agents in the most elite law enforcement agency in the world. We're the biggest and best and greatest that has ever been. And we like that. When I was a young FBI agent, I knocked on the door, and in South Carolina, I was looking for this fugitive, and I went to the neighbor's house. And I knocked on the door. This is in the early 70s. And a woman answers the door. I said, "My name's Gary Noesner. Here's my credentials. I'm with the FBI. I'd like to ask you a few questions if I could." She says, "Stop right there. Stop right there. Let me go get my kids in the backyard. They have never met an FBI agent before, and they will be so excited." Well, she gave me the information I was looking for, and I was probably 10, 12 feet tall when I walked off of that front porch. You know, feeling pretty good about myself. And that was the reputation we had. But what I've learned is an organization has to constantly struggle to maintain a hard-fought and hopefully well-deserved reputation. Of everything that's ever happened in the history of the FBI, in my opinion, the tragedy of Waco is the biggest black mark on us because it did not come out the way we wanted. I know there may be some of you out there, and there's others that believed that the FBI went out there and purposely just wanted to see everybody get killed. And I'd like to soften this if I could. I'm just going to tell you, you're just flat out wrong. I have strong disagreements, and am the strongest critic of the FBI and some of the managerial decisions made. But the people that made those decisions, believe it or not, were trying to do what they thought was best to get everybody to come out alive. Tim was absolutely right. This was not a hostage situation. We never looked at it as a hostage situation. That's the name of the position I housed. I was a hostage negotiator. We changed it later to call it crisis negotiator to encompass a broader interpretation, although we always embraced the broader interpretation. Our job is to go to very dangerous situations, often where there's been a loss of life, and de-escalate the violence that's already occurred, to create a relationship of trust and influence somebody to not harm themselves or others. Believe it or not, we have a success rate of over 90% in doing that. Negotiations were started by New York City in the 70s and quickly embraced by the FBI and spread around the country. And in fact, the FBI, long before the Waco incident, was recognized worldwide as the leading source of information on how to do this and how to do it right. And what I'm going to tell you is, when I'm often asked, as I was today by some folks who wanted to interview me, what did I learn? What did we learn from Waco in terms of negotiations? The primary lesson we learned was to do things the way we had always done them. We departed from our normal procedures at Waco. We knew better. And I'm going to talk about that. That being said, who's ultimately responsible? Who was responsible for the outcome? Well, it's probably a lot of people. FBI agents are fairly defensive, and they say, well, since David Koresh was this manipulating, controlling guy, therefore he was a bad guy, therefore it's all his fault. And if this room was full of law enforcement officers, every head in the audience would go, yeah, that's right. Well, whether that's true or not, we can debate. But what we can't debate is because he may or may not have been one thing, doesn't mean that we in the FBI didn't make mistakes. We did. And I want to talk a little bit more about those. On February 28th, I was with my family in suburban Washington at a hardware store, and my beeper went off back when we carried beepers. And I called FBI headquarters, and I was told to go to the airport, get on an FBI plane, and fly to Waco, because there had been this incident. I flew out. I arrived there the night of the 28th, saw what had happened. I was there at the Texas Technical College, which was converted to a former air base, and there were ATF agents walking around in literal shock because of what had happened. We had FBI agents showing up in resources. What happens in the federal government, the raid on the 28th, and I'm not here to defend it or criticize it, that is done by the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms Agency, a completely different organization from the FBI. Once federal agents of any agency are murdered, it now becomes an FBI primary investigation, and that's what brought us into it, so you know that. I fly out, and I know that the FBI will assume command of the situation, but it takes a little time for that to happen. I hook up immediately with a small group who were attempting to negotiate with Koresh. A few children had come out already, and they were exhausted from having spoken most of the day, and they said, Gary, would you take over through the night? Now, as the chief negotiator for the FBI, it's typically not my role anymore other than to get on the phone. I manage the whole thing, although I have no shortage of experience being on the phone. So I got on the phone and spoke with David Koresh through the night. I found him to be a mix. I found him rational, but angry, extremely angry at ATF. Obviously suffering from a bullet wound he had sustained. Frustrated, obviously tired. And my goal was one thing simply, to keep the flow of children coming out. Our mission in one of these situations is to de-escalate. When tension is high, when emotions are high, rational decision-making is absent. The role of the negotiator is to lower that emotion, create a relationship of trust, and begin to convince people to do what we believe is in their own good, and certainly our good, to come out peacefully, to resolve the situation. Some more kids came out the next morning, and I'll come back to that in a minute. Let me also tell you a little bit more about FBI culture. There are 56 field offices, fiefdoms, around the United States. Each one is headed by a special agent in charge. Special agent in charge is the equivalent of a military general. They have a lot of autonomy to run cases, at least they did then. It's changed a little bit today, post 9/11, where headquarters takes a more dominant role. But back then, that person in charge locally could make a lot more decisions than you might believe was the case. The other thing was, in addition to sending myself out there, there were 2 full-time negotiators in the FBI assigned back to the FBI Academy. Myself and my partner were essentially the rank of a major. And we managed all 350 FBI negotiators spread throughout the country. So my first task was to have all these negotiators, several dozen, fly to Waco to be part of my team. And I would be in charge of all the negotiations. They also deployed the hostage rescue team. The FBI had created many years before what you would call a super SWAT team, a team meant to be able to respond to acts of extreme terrorism in the United States. There is a law called Posse Comitatus that prohibits the U.S. military from enforcing laws within the country. So the FBI, with the approval of the highest levels of government, created this hostage rescue team. 65 people, multi-million budget, highly trained tactical specialists. They flew out in response to this incident. They are headed by the equivalent of a colonel. Now, FBI long-term philosophy has been, at a siege, there are 3 critical people. The on-scene commander, and at equal influence under him, the chief negotiator, and the head of the tactical team. That is our triumvirate. But you can see already, because of the budget of the hostage rescue team, general, colonel, major. There was a bit of a rank differential. When my budget consists of buying a couple FBI ball caps, and his is multiple helicopters and so forth, there's a little bit of disparity in influence. This was influenced more greatly by the fact that several years prior, we had an incident at a federal prison in Talladega. I was there negotiating. We negotiated for 8 days. We were secured one of the hostages. I think there were 8 or 9 hostages. Kitty Sutter came out and she told us that it was unraveling inside. The inmates were about to start killing other hostages. They had drawn names from that they put in a hat. The FBI hostage rescue team made an assault, went into the prison, apprehended all the inmates, secured the safe release of all the victims, and not a shot was fired. It was brilliant. The downside of that was the hostage rescue team's commander came away from that feeling a certain level of infallibility. What's worse is top-level officials at FBI headquarters felt the same way. Where historically in law enforcement, and certainly the FBI, tactical intervention was always viewed as the last recourse. The action of last resort, the action of least desire because it places people in danger. When we go into a place and have to use potentially deadly force, we do so not because we can, but because the actions and behaviors of the person we're confronting leave us no choice. In other words, they're about to kill a hostage or they killed a hostage. Then we say we have to go in to save other lives. So Talladega really enhanced the status of this hostage rescue team commander, as was stated before lunch. This morning, there was the Ruby Ridge incident in 1992, the fall of 92. I was out of the country for that. The tactical commander, leveraging that higher status, made some very bad decisions, very illegal decisions. You can shoot anyone who has a weapon. That is unconstitutional. The Constitution says you can discharge your weapon and use deadly force only if your life or someone else's life is threatened. The facts as presented to you this morning were a little off. No one purposely shot Vicki Weaver. Someone tried to shoot one of the individuals running into the cabin. The bullet went through the door and killed her I'm not saying that was a good thing, but I'm saying an FBI marksman did not intentionally shoot that woman. It's a tragedy. Now, despite that terrible start of that situation, the shootout with the marshals, the FBI shows up, surrounds the building, ends up killing Vicki Weaver. The situation that people forget is that it's still successfully negotiated after 8 days. FBI negotiators using intermediaries did that. And I wasn't there, I'm tooting my horn. But it shows that the process works even in the worst of circumstances. The problems associated with Ruby Ridge had not fully surfaced by the time of Waco. I forget the professor's name said that this morning, but he was quite right that probably action should have been taken. And had it been taken after Ruby Ridge, Waco would have turned out differently. Now let me get on to Waco. What was our job? It was not a hostage situation. A hostage situation is a situation in which somebody says, you will do this for me or you do that. You provide me this money, this getaway car, whatever it is. In those situations, we're highly successful because we have leverage. They need us to do something that they can't do on their own. It becomes a quid pro quo bargaining interaction. In Waco, what do we have? David Koresh and followers saying, go away, leave us alone, we're not under your authority. And in fact, that's the one thing we couldn't do. There were 4 dead ATF agents, 17 wounded, 6 Davidians killed. This was a situation that nobody could say, oh, I guess he's right, let's go home. Wasn't going to happen, ever. But then how do you remove yourself from that violence and convince these people now to become compliant? After all, you've just come and attacked them from their point of view. So what we had to do is try to distance ourselves from ATF. The first thing I did when I negotiated with Koresh that first night, I'm sitting in a room with 6 or 7, probably more than that, 8 or 9 ATF agents who had been part of the raid and who had the look of death on their face. And I said, gentlemen, I'm going to tell you something right now. When I talk to David Koresh, I'm going to distance the FBI from the ATF. I'm going to tell them that what you did is what you did, what we're here now to resolve it peacefully and get everybody alive. I'm not criticizing you for this. I'm not denigrating your agency. But I want him to shift over and think that now there's somebody new in here, somebody different from me. And that's what I did. And they nodded in understanding. I don't know if they approved. I didn't really ask. Over the next several days, we began to get kids out. Now, I'm not going to tell you this was a byproduct of some grand deal. Koresh decided to let kids go. Sometimes if we would have a radio station recite a verse of scripture. As a negotiator, I could care less what brings somebody out. If it comes out while we're negotiating, it's a negotiation success. Plain and simple. I'll take out everybody I can. And by the way, early on, I think we realized that this was not going to be a grand solution. We're not going to come up with this. David, listen to me. I'm going to tell you this, and now you will see the wisdom in surrender. We always viewed it as fulfilling a theory I call trickle flow gush. We wanted to get a trickle of people come out. Hopefully that would encourage other people to come out, and eventually maybe they would all come out. That's what we were trying to do. Baby steps, little bit by little bit, little signs of achievement. Developing the interaction where we work together successfully to make things happen. And you know what? We were on track. When the children came out, most, if not all of them, had a little note pinned to them saying, I'm to be sent off to, I'll just make a name up, Aunt Sophie in Des Moines. Well, we didn't send them off to Aunt Sophie in Des Moines. We put them under the auspices of the Child Protective Services. Why? We wanted to tell the parents, hey, your child is here waiting for you to come out and resume your parental responsibility. We knew that David Koresh had a very hypnotic stranglehold. I don't mean in the ooh sense hypnotic. He had a lot of sway over his followers. They did and believed what he told them to believe. Now, we wanted to sort of break that stranglehold and get these parents to think about really being parents and taking care of those children. There's another thing. When we picked these children up, they were brought to the negotiation room by negotiators, handled very gently, very appropriately, put on the laps of one of my people, and we would call into the site. When this broke out, we did not know who all the people were. We knew very few of the people. We would get David or Steve Snyder on the phone and say, we have picked up this child. Can you put the mother on the phone so we can make sure she knows her kid's okay? they would put mom on the phone. Before we would put the child on the phone with mom, we would say, by the way, I'm John, Fred, Gary, whatever, with the FBI, and we only want to see you come out of this alive. Nobody wants you to be hurt. We're trying to be helpful here too. And find out who they were. Try to get a sense of their attitude. We identified a good many people in the compound just through this process. Then we let them talk to their kids, and their kids universally said, oh, it was a fun ride. They picked me up in a tank. They brought me back here. They gave me something to drink. They're nice men. This is what we wanted. We wanted the parents to say, hey, these are not evil Babylonians out here. These are good people with families. So we kept the kids there. And that worked pretty well. I'll come back to that in a few minutes. Over the first, we hit March 2nd. This is just 3 days into this ordeal. And you've heard this. David Koresh, in a conversation with the negotiator, said, listen, I would like to have a national broadcast where I can voice my beliefs. And we knew there was a problem with that because we didn't want to create a stage for a fiery ending. We were aware of Jonestown. We asked them about suicide all the time. They continually denied they would commit suicide. Did we totally believe it? No. But we were aware of this had potential. So I said, David, how about, rather than you have a live broadcast, how about you make a recording? Let us listen to the recording, and if it's not problematic, if it doesn't foretell a suicide, and if you say at the end of it you will come out afterwards, then I'll do my best to get it played. As a negotiator, I always had to have a last cutout. I will be your advocate. I will try to convince my boss to make this happen. That's standard negotiation policy. That way when something goes bad, I blame the boss. If it goes good, I take the credit. You can also go far in the government with this attitude, by the way. Blame others for problems, and industry for that matter, but that's neither here nor there. The tape comes out. We review it. I believe it was sent here to Baylor to listen to. Nobody could find within the text any indication of a suicide forthcoming. We got hold of the Christian Broadcast Network. They very kindly agreed to broadcast it. They did. Koresh heard it, and he was happy. We now went through an elaborate discussion about the surrender plan. How the kids would come out 2 by 2. They would be met here, they would be walked over here, and then somebody else would come out, and so forth and so on. And David Koresh was actually going to come out first in a stretcher, as I recall, and then Steve Snyder was going to stay inside and talk everybody out. There is a process through which, as negotiators, we go through that in great detail, so there's no misunderstanding, and so that whatever is agreed to is actually shared in that decision-making by the person with whom we're making the arrangement. Well, as Phil said, Dr. Phil Arnold, when we had this all set up, we were ready to begin the countdown. We called back in because nothing was happening, and we talked to Steve Snyder. He said, "Well, David is upstairs. He's wounded. They're having difficulty getting him downstairs. He's in a stretcher, and he's in pain." All right, makes sense. So we gave him some more time. We called back and said, "David wants to have a final prayer meeting," and as some of you are aware, he had very lengthy prayer meetings. So I said, okay, we'll give him some time to do that. We know from children released later on in the process, they were in fact lined up. They had their little backpacks. They were ready to come out. Time went by, we called Snyder, and he said, David's not coming out. God told him to wait. Now, I don't know if some people in here figure he really had this epiphany. I'm kind of thinking he had, my personal skepticism is that he had ambivalence about coming out. Part of him wanted to come out, part of him didn't want to come out. He knew what he was facing in terms of criminal prosecution. So I think he had a lot of ambivalence. For whatever reason, he had this communication from God, and he decided not to come out. Now, as a negotiator, I'm used to talking to people that don't always do what they say they're going to do. You'd be surprised how often that happens. I've had to train myself not to overreact to that. When I reported to the on-scene commander, he about had a heart attack. He was visibly pissed off. How dare he defy us? He promised. He's lying. Now I will take a step back. In negotiation lore, not lore, I started this in the unit, the very first slide when I'm teaching a brand new negotiator is a thing called self-control. If you can't control your own emotions, how can you begin to attempt to influence somebody else? Well, our odds commander lost his self-control, and he ordered the tanks forward. Now, the ceasefire had been obtained based on the promise from the FBI not to go on their property. Let the from ATF, really. Let the ATF agents pick up the wounded, exit the property, you stay off the property. Now, we were getting back on the property. And Koresh said, what are you doing? You broke your promise. And of course, we said, well, you broke your promise. You were going to come out. Oh, yeah? Boom, 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 boom. Is any of this helpful? No. What I had recommended is, wait a minute, let's not react this way. Because he did not follow through on what he promised, we now have a card. We have a little bit of leverage. We can go back and say, David, you know, I went out on a limb with my boss to play this tape. And you promised you would come out. You really put me in a bad light. I'm trying to help you here, but you have to help me to help you. That's how we do it as negotiators. It didn't happen that way. And it dug us in a hole and created some problems. Despite that, we got back on track, and we got some more kids out. Through March 5th, 6 days into this, 21 children and the two elderly ladies whose photograph was shown in Chuck's slides, I believe, or came out as well. They lived in I understand, a trailer off the side of the compound, and they came out fairly early. We were hoping they could tell us, what are people thinking, what's going on, what does David say? They had no valuable information at all. They just were not involved in any discussions. So all we had were kids, but we didn't know what the Davidians were thinking. We didn't know what they were planning. And we were trying desperately to find this out. So we kept working away at it. Now what did we do? Someone, I'd like to say it was me, and I'll take credit for it, but I can't. No, not really. One of the negotiators came up with a great idea. Let's videotape these kids in the Child Protective Service home and send it inside to show the mothers. Accomplished several purposes. Again, show that the kids are well cared for, remind them of their maternal responsibility for their children, and we did it. And it was a wonderful, heartwarming tape, and we sent it in, and it had a dramatic impact on the people inside. There was one surprise in that, however. There's a woman named Kathy Schroeder inside. Kathy Schroeder's husband was killed. Catherine mentioned he was coming into the compound. I just want to clarify a little bit. She said he was just coming back in to see his family. That may be true, but he also shot at federal agents on his way back in, and that's why he was killed. He just wasn't some innocent guy gunned down. But be that as it may, he's killed the day of the shootout, trying to get back inside the compound. She hated us. She absolutely, understandably hated us. She had 4 kids, one with Mike Schroeder, the youngest, and 3 children she had from a prior marriage. The only children released from the Child Protective Service home were those 3 older kids whose father had joint custody and we could not legally hold them. When we showed the video inside, unbeknownst to us, little Brian, her youngest and only son now still being held there, looked a little bit forlorn. She got on the phone, read us the riot act. How dare you take his brothers away from him? He needs his brothers. He needs this, he needs that, you terrible people. And I passed to John Dolan, our negotiator, then the best note I've ever written as a coach. You know, when someone's negotiating, people don't interrupt them, they pass them notes very selectively. And I wrote this note down, and he's talking to her, he looks up at me and he smiles. And then he reads the note. Moms, see how this one works. Kathy, what Brian needs now is a hug from his mom. Boom! Direct hit to the heart. She choked up. She said, I'm coming out. She didn't consult with David. She didn't ask if it was okay. She said, I'm coming out. And she did. The next day, along with Oliver Kafarth, I believe. She came out. We videotaped her reunion with Brian at between the two of them. Heartwarming, every one of them. And by the way, every one of these kids, I think some of us thought early on we were going to get these weird cult kids. They were beautiful kids. They were happy, they were well cared for, they were clean. You know, so we didn't think this was some weird group torturing their kids. You know, I don't know where that comes from, but that wasn't our look at it. Beautiful kids. We all wanted to adopt them, to tell you the truth. So then we let Kathy go visit the other kids, and we taped that. So Kathy now gets on the phone and talks to the moms and says, yeah, this is good stuff. Steve Snyder was, audibly impressed. Really? Really? They're taking good care of them? They took good care of you? They didn't believe the kind of treatment. So this is exactly what we wanted to achieve. David sent a tape out of him and his family. The FBI, 4 or 5 of us up to that point who had spoken to Koresh, we sent in a video we've never done before or since of ourselves holding up pictures of our families and said, David, my name's Gary. Here's my 3 kids. Here's their name. I love my kids and I know you love your family. I'm here to get you and all your family out here. We think it had a powerful and positive impact. This is all great stuff, but you have to understand enormous pressure externally. News media and others. What's taking so long? Why can't the FBI do this? Everybody that criticized us afterwards for going in after 35 days, 52 days, were the same people criticizing us for what's taking so long before. You're damned if you do, and you're damned if you don't. There was, I'm sure, at $1 million a day or whatever it was costing the government, there was a lot of pressure on the on-scene commander to make something happen. And by the way, in law enforcement, we don't like it when people don't do what we tell them to do. We just don't like it at all. Maybe you didn't hear me. I told you to put your hands up. I told you to obey. I'm the man. It's our culture. That's how we are. It takes a lot of restraint and a lot of patience to contain your emotions in these situations. So, we tried to get back on track. Now, let me tell you something about, I know this group is very focused on theology and religion. Early on, we made a decision, I made a decision that that was not going to be the path that got us out here. Number one, I think it's a fool's game to try to convince somebody that their beliefs are wrong and that you've now corrected them on how they should believe. I don't believe bringing in a religious scholar to talk to David Koresh would have been the answer. Oh, let me explain to you how you misinterpret the 5th seal. You heard Dr. Arnold. Dr. Arnold said he had some interesting arguments. I don't agree with him, but he had some interesting arguments. I'm not sure how that discussion would go. At the turn of the century, the millennium, I went to Israel for a big religious conference. And a bunch of scholars there, religious scholars, said, if you have one of these millennial situations, you should bring us in to talk to the person. And I heard this for a while, and I couldn't stand it anymore. I finally said at this conference, listen, it's your child now. It's not some hypothetical. It's your child, and a very strongly devout religious person has had a knife to the throat of your child. You have 2 choices. Pick a religious scholar from Yeshiva University to come up and talk to this guy and see how it goes. Or use one of your negotiators that's done this 300 times without losing anyone's life. I don't know about you, but if you're a parent, it's a no-brainer. It's a no-brainer. Go with the tested, talented person who knows how to do this. Yes, theology is a factor, but it's not the driving factor. It's not the most important factor. Behavior is. Now, I've never called Koresh crazy. I talked to him. He's not. But he was very self-focused, very controlling, very manipulating. His power came from his rule over his followers. That's as much really as I need to know. Not that we closed down other information we had. Each negotiation shift had 12 to 15 negotiators, profilers, reaching out to scholars. There was a lot of work done that we just don't have time to go over. How religious was David? He played with us a little bit. God said to wait instead of surrendering as he promised. I believe it was Easter came and he said, I may come out Easter. And we said, okay, it's Easter. He said, well, it's not my Easter. And we said, well, when's your Easter? He said, I'll let you know. One time he said, if you could tell me what the meaning of the 5th seal is, I'll let a kid go. So we get Baylor and we said, here's what people typically interpret the 5th seal. He says, you're not even close. He played games with us all the time. One night he asked the night shift, where are you guys eating at night? They said, Whataburger. And he said, Whataburger, terrible meat. He says, if I am the Son of God, the world will find out about Whataburger. That didn't sound too theological to us. Most importantly, Paul Harvey News broadcast, just coincidentally, a show about a guitar-shaped nebula moving through the universe at a gazillion miles an hour. And we said, oh, mackerel, what a good fortune this is. So we called them up and said, will you rebroadcast it? And they kindly said they would. We called Steve Snyder and said, you guys got to listen to this broadcast. This maybe is the sign that David's looking for. And Snyder saw it, he said, oh my God, it's amazing. Well, what did David say? He said, well, at 80,000 miles an hour or whatever it is, it's not very fast. And that's all he said. So I think had we attempted, people in here may disagree, that's fine. I think had we tried to use religion as an argument, we would have been on a slippery slope of an ever-changing playing field. Everyone that we got out, all 35 people came out during the time I was there, in those times we were not talking theology. It's what we kept in the here and now. In fact, I had to get angry at my night shift because they would like to stay up late at night and talk theology. And that was all well and good, but then he would sleep all day long. And while he was asleep, nobody made a decision to do nothing. And no kids came out. So I said, you got to quit keeping him up at night so we can get something done during the day. Now, on March 15th, Byron Sage, the FBI negotiator from Austin, and became a very central player in this, and Sheriff Hartwell met Steve Snyder and Wayne Martin outside to try to make a deal going. And in that, we found out that the Davidians had some concerns about what would happen in jail, where would they be housed, would they be able to meet as a group, how would the crime scene be preserved. They were scared that the federal government would come in and hide evidence that would have supported their innocence in the shootout at ATF, so forth and so on. And even David Koresh got on the phone once and he said, I'm a little concerned about jail. We've got Bubba's in there, and Bubba might take advantage of me, meaning in a sexual way. So we sent in a letter from the special agent in charge and from the sheriff saying that they wouldn't be able to meet as a group at jail. We wouldn't be put with Bubba. And we also tried to appeal to the fact that a trial that was done in suit, we didn't lie to him and say, oh, you're not going to be fine, we'll let you go. No, you got to go to trial. But we knew he'd been in court before in the George Road incident, and he came out, he was declared innocent, or not convicted. So we tried to answer his questions and make accommodations that would encourage him. And I think there's part of him that seriously considered it. With David, I think we always had this issue of ambivalence. Part of him wanted to come out, part of him wanted to stay in. It's been my experience, many of my colleagues in law enforcement think that every time we face somebody, everything's calculated, they know exactly what they're going to do, they're manipulating us. My personal experience is most people in these situations take it moment for moment. They simply don't know how to get out of the situation they got into. And I think that's exactly what we saw here. Now, somewhere along this line, they decided to mess with the power. Power on, power off. This is not FBI doctrine. And worse, and by the way, the lights were not put up to stop the Davidians from signaling. CNN was using infrared stuff. They were illuminating our people on the perimeter. And as you know, out there in the flat territory, there's no place to hide. That's why they brought the vehicles in. So their lights were put up to stymie that. That's the story I'm told. What's more egregious is the loudspeakers. The loudspeakers were brought in to be able to say to the Davidians, hey, we've broken the phone line, the tank went over the hard line phone line that we sent in, and we got to send a new phone line out. And they would readily accept it. Later on, one of the commanders at night brought these goofy tapes of Dying Rabbits and Nancy Sinatra. And I will tell you, to this day, it's the single most embarrassing thing about this incident. Particularly when people say, why did you negotiators do that? We don't do that. It has always been against the FBI's doctrine, and it didn't work in Panama with Noriega, despite what some people believe. It's a terrible thing to do. And in fact, Steve Snyder gets on the phone and he says, what am I supposed to take away from this? What is my government telling me by playing Nancy Sinatra music? And I mean, as a negotiator, we're embarrassed. It took me 3 days to get FBI headquarters to finally intervene and say, stop that crap. And they did. But a lot of damage was done, and it's extremely embarrassing. That's what happens sometimes. People have their own ideas on what to do. I was walking down the hallway one day, and 2 helicopter pilots walked by, and they said, hey, we really buzzed them, didn't we? Yeah, I said, we couldn't have been more than 50 feet over the roof. And I stopped and I said, excuse me, sir, are you talking about the compound? He said, yeah. He said, who told you to do that? Well, we thought it'd be a good idea. I said, don't think. Don't do that. It's important that everything we say and do is consistent on the same sheet of music. If the negotiators talk nice, the people on the outside should talk nice. All right. I've got to move along. I'm sorry. Let me skip ahead. Well, what happened is, despite these problems, we got back on track. And through our good efforts, and I'm very proud of this, it culminated on the 21st of March. 7 adults came out. Walking, talking, breathing adults. We'd already had Kathy Schroeder and Oliver come out. 7 more came out. We believed, and negotiators, that this was a manifestation of our patient trickle flow gush theory. I envisioned in my mind a train platform, and David Koresh and all the followers were on the platform. And David is slowly watching people get on the train, which is about to leave the station. And people ask me, what do you think he will do? I said, well, he has 2 choices. He can stay on the platform, 3 choices. He can get on the last minute on the caboose, or at some point in time he's going to have an epiphany and go to the front and lead his people out. And I said, I think that's what he will do. Because losing control of all his followers, I think, was more than he could bear. That's my theory. Feel free to disagree with it. But we got those 7 people out immediately afterwards. Unbeknownst to the negotiators, without consultation, tanks went forward and removed vehicles from the south side of the building. On a very slim premise, well, they could come out and hide behind them and shoot at us. Well, they haven't done it in 21 days. Why do you think they're going to do it now? Too late. It was frustration. It's taking so long, not enough are coming out quick enough. I knew when that happened, negotiations as a practical matter had ended. And David Koresh told us as such. And it did. There was no one else to come out at all, ever during the ordeal. And that's a damn shame. Because I think on that day, we were close to being on the verge of making a big difference here. Excuse me. And as you know, I was an impediment to stronger tactical action. I was looked at as keeping people from doing more what they wanted. The FBI had 2 philosophical parties in this. The negotiation side, and you heard our philosophical approach. And the tactical side that want to tighten the noose, exert ever-increasing pressure, and force them to do what we want. We call it in negotiations the paradox of power. The harder you push, the more likely you are to get resistance. Sheriff Jack Harwell, when he was still alive, would spend a lot of time with us in the negotiation room. He raised mules. And I said, Jack, this is like your mules. You might be able to grab the reins of the mule and say, dear mule, please follow me over here to water and grain and Mrs. Mule or whatever it is you want. That's a joke. Or if you go around the back of the mule and try to push it towards where you want it to go, it will never happen. Because even in that mule's pea brain, he says, if they want me to do it, it must not be good for me. So they resist. People ain't any different, folks. They're not any different. So things were kind of ended there. We rotated personnel out every 3 weeks. So I had been in my 4th week, and while you don't necessarily change out the negotiation team leader, it was presented to me, okay, we're going to bring someone else in. I knew secretly, and found out more details later, that they wanted to replace me with someone they felt would be more compliant and taking stronger action. And they did so. And that person did take over, and no one else came out. Now, I went home for a few days, tracked this every day, flew to the Middle East for something completely unrelated, flew home from the Middle East on April 18th. And I called to the command center, and they said, I said, am I going back out to Waco? And they said, no, come in here, we're putting in gas tomorrow. I said, okay. I come in there, I watch it on the screen, it's like a NASA center. I saw the fire. I was disgusted. I got up and walked out without asking permission. I got on a plane next day and I flew to Lucasville, Ohio to a prison situation and helped resolve that peacefully. So I didn't see my family for a long time, not that this is about me. Before Waco, the FBI had handled Atlanta prison, Talladega prison, Oakdale prison, CSA siege, peacefully, nobody killed. We knew how to do this, and we didn't do it right at Waco. After Waco, we knew we had screwed up. We knew too much power and control had been in the hands of someone ill-prepared to make those decisions. So, I'm sorry, I'm taking just a minute or two too long here. So, we changed and created the Critical Incident Response Group. My unit was created as a standalone unit. I was made a colonel to be equal to the HRT guy. The on-scene commander was encouraged to retire. The tactical team commander was encouraged to retire. I was promoted. It tells you a little something. But we changed, we created a critical ops response group, put all these assets under one umbrella so they could be managed better, and we could stick to the philosophy that had done us well for so many years. Now, some people don't want to believe it or don't want to admit it. An independent arson investigation said that the Davidians started the fire. I believe that. I don't believe the FBI went in there with any intent that it was going to end that way. I think some bad decisions were made about how they went in and what they did. We don't have time to go through those. But they did find 60 AR-15s, 60 AK-47s, 250 caliber sniper rifles, 2 million rounds of ammunition. You know, all the people that died, 28 from gunshot, 27 children killed. There were 215 hours of negotiations, 949 separate conversations. I mean, to say that we didn't try earnestly to get them out, I think it's just simply not listening to the facts. Were mistakes made? You betcha. You betcha. But it's really challenging. I know if I could take something back, I wish the people inside had realized the stranglehold David had over them. I wish David had been more reasonable. You know, David was wounded. We thought he might die of septicemia. If he had died in that first week, I guarantee you every single person in that compound would be alive today. 3 years later, we went to Montana, handled an 85-day siege with Montana Freeman. Dangerous siege. This time the negotiators ran the whole show. Not a shot was fired. Everybody came out alive. We have regained the appropriate way of doing this and have done many since. So that's important for you to know. I'm not making excuses for what happened out there, but that's the way it was. So I think I've taken up all of my time. As Dr. Melton said, these things are a little bit more complex than you may realize. Government's not all bad. Davidians weren't all bad. There's a lot of blame to go around as to what came out of this. So that's it. I know I don't think I have any time for questions. You want to keep on schedule, is that right? Yeah. But I will be around, so if any of you want to come up and tell me you think the FBI is terrible and I'm a jackbooted thug, fine. I've heard it all before. Mostly from my children, but that's a different thing. My son, the Navy SEAL, tells it to me quite often. And so, thank you all very much.
So we've got a 15-minute break here, so go get something to drink and come right back because we got lots more interesting things.